We are roughly 90 days away from the 2026 U.S. Senate elections, and today we're going to be talking about these specific races that are closer or close-ish, shall I say, in the 2026 midterms and how they're going to impact the race for the United States Senate and whether Republicans can maintain control of the Senate or if Democrats have an opportunity to upset. We're going to look at the stats of the races, and we're going to talk about how these races may be impacted, starting with the states that I've already characterized. So if you look on the map already, you'll see that I have a number of states already characterized as very dark red and a very dark blue. This means that these states are ones in which I believe personally and statistically will go to the Republican or Democratic Party, depending on which state it is, by a margin of over 15 percentage points, what we characterize as safe Republican and safe Democratic states. So Republicans and Democrats have their fair share of these, which bring the total numbers to 43 for the Democrats and 42 for the Republicans right out of the gate on this specific map. So with that said, I want to go ahead and talk about some of these states that are more likely to go to each party. So more likely to go to the Democrats, more likely to go to the Republicans, but not quite in that safe margin. So not quite at that 15 plus percentage point margin. So we're going to be looking at states like Kansas. Kansas is a state that if you look at the statistics here lately, it's about a 10% margin in favor of Republicans, which tracks with where polling and every average data point is. And overall just tracks with the idea that this state is in that likely Republican column. Similar situation in the state of Mississippi, where they're also having an opportunity in the state of Mississippi not to be so solid red, not to be that 15 plus percentage point margin. Nebraska, another state where Pete Ricketts is actually running for re-election to run for a full 6-year term, and Osborne is actually a independent candidate who's performing relatively well, but ultimately polling in averages, and statistically he's still sitting at about 6% margin for Pete Ricketts ahead, and with that said, that puts him in the likely Republican column. Another couple of states that I want to take a look at are the state of Florida, where Ashley Moody is running for for a special election to serve for the remainder of the term, and that full election will be up in 2028. Ashley Moody was appointed to that race when Marco Rubio was appointed to Secretary of State. So ultimately has a real opportunity to be somewhat of a close race. The Democrats have put up a good candidate in the state of Florida, but still just not in that point where I'm willing to say that it's relatively close on the average of being under 5 percentage points in favor of Republicans. Right now, we're anywhere from 5 to 15% in the state of Florida as well. That said, let's move over to the state of South Carolina, one that I've talked about on this channel here recently, and the video actually got quite a bit of traction, so I want to take a minute to talk about this and why Republicans are doing well in the state, but not as well as maybe they want to. So, of course, former Senator Lindsey Graham ultimately passed away, and his sister, Darlene Graham, has been appointed to that race, ultimately a special primary set to take place in about a week for that. To see who will be on the ballot in the November election. But ultimately, at this point, Republicans have never been in a spot that they were estimated to perform overwhelmingly in the state of South Carolina. And this is only proven so with this said, South Carolina looking about a 10% margin, that's similar to 2020, so it puts it in that likely Republican margin. Again, that's anywhere from 5, my apologies, to 15%, so 10% right in the middle of that, and leaves South Carolina in that likely Republican column. Of course, as time goes on, as data progresses, this race could change, but as of right now, that's the data point set that we have for the state of South Carolina. So with that said, that is all of the states that I have for the Republican Party in that likely Republican margin. So this brings the Republicans to 47, and Democrats have their fair share of likely margin victories, where Democrats are expected to win by over 5 percentage points, but not quite over 15%. I want to start by talking about the state of Minnesota. There's a 10th primary happening in the state for Democrats right now, but ultimately I don't think that that impacts the race for the Senate seat in the general election too much. I believe Democrats are still very likely to win this race and likely to win it by over 5 percentage points, just not quite to that safe Democratic margin of 15 percentage points, especially for a state like Minnesota that's traditionally, of course, been leaning towards the Democrats, but ultimately still is a closer state than maybe if we look at Virginia, where it's ultimately just proven in recent elections that Democrats are overwhelmingly favored in states like that. So Minnesota, slightly different state, but still very good victory for the Democrats in the state nonetheless. So with that said, let's move over to the state of North Carolina. If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you know how I feel about this race. You know what I say about this race, and a lot of people will also say that I'm wrong or that they disagree with me, but ultimately the facts are the facts, and that is that Roy Cooper, very strong candidate in the state of North Carolina, running against flawed candidate of Michael Whatley, never been elected to statewide office, only served as party chair of the party in North Carolina and ultimately on the national level as well, and ultimately just not this real standout candidate who can perform overwhelmingly in the state of North Carolina. Roy Cooper, capitalizing off the momentum that Democrats are having in the 2026 midterms and this opportunity for him to perform very well. Doesn't hurt him necessarily that he's running against someone like Michael Whatley, who, again, like I said before, not the strongest candidate. That said, let's move over to the state of New Hampshire, where I also believe that the state is in that likely Democratic column. You know, the New Hampshire race, ultimately, the Democrats have performed well, like similar to Minnesota. They've performed well here, but they have had their fair share of opportunities where Republicans have also performed very well here. But ultimately, still going to be a solid victory in the state of New Hampshire there, and I believe that the Democrats win this by anywhere from 5 to 15%. That said, final prediction for the likely column for the Democrats is the state of Georgia. And this is going to surprise some people, but again, if you've been following my channel for any length of time, you know what to expect in my personal predictions and where I base things off of polling and statistically and betting odds and everything that I use to count the metrics here. This is no surprise. The state of Georgia, Jon Ossoff running against a flawed candidate for the Republican Party in the state of Georgia, and ultimately just being able to capitalize off of that, similar to that in North Carolina, just maybe not quite as bad for the Republicans in Georgia, but ultimately still not picking the strongest candidates that they have. Brian Kemp, who I would argue was the strongest candidate the Republicans possibly could have had, and ultimately decided not to run for this race. It's going to hurt Republicans on that statewide level in this opportunity to flip a Senate seat. And I just don't see it happening. I don't see Republicans flipping this, and I ultimately believe that Democrats are going to win this by a pretty solid margin, above 5 percentage points here in the 2026 midterms. So, with that said, let's switch over and talk about some of these states that are more lean Democrat. So this is anywhere from 1 percentage point to 5 percentage points. So we're going to talk about this on the Republican side, and then of course the Democratic side as well, on where some of those races stand. And as of this moment, the only race that I have characterized for the Republicans in this lean Republican margin is going to be the state of Iowa. This state has been very interesting here lately. Rob Sand, who's running for governor in the state of Iowa, is performing very well and ultimately has an opportunity to carry over that momentum in the Senate race for Democrats, and the ability to have an opportunity really to flip this race. Now, as of this moment, I don't believe that Democrats have the upper hand here. In fact, I think they are handed the tougher race here. Of course, it's a state like Iowa, and it's not going to just be a slam dunk like some people may think with someone like Rob Sand helping that ticket. It's just not going to be enough to carry over the momentum. There's going to be a lot more that needs to happen there. And at this point, I would say that Iowa's in that lean Republican margin, anywhere from a percentage point to 5 percentage points. But in my personal opinion, probably more closer to the 5% than the 1%. So, that being the only Republican state in that lean Republican margin, we're going to move over to the Democrats, which have two races in which I'd characterize anywhere from a percent to to 5%. And those are going to be states such as the state of Michigan. I think this is ultimately where we stand as of this moment when I'm filming the video. Of course, we're going to find a lot out from that primary on Tuesday. But as of this moment, I think that Democrats still have a leverage in the state of Michigan. It's a state that Republicans have failed to flip time and time again, especially on the Senate level. And ultimately, I don't believe that a blue Democratic environment is going to help Mike Rogers. And even if Abdul Al-Sayed is the Democratic nominee, which many people predict is going to be the case, and some even will go as far as saying that he's the weaker of the two candidates, I ultimately believe that this is still the Democrats' race to lose, and they're still performing pretty well overall in the state of Michigan, but ultimately polling may have you believe otherwise. But I'm still not quite to the point that I'm willing to flip this from a Democratic win to a Republican win. And ultimately, I still believe that the Democrats are favored here anywhere from 1% to 5%, probably definitely closer to the percentage point margin, though. Next state is the state of Maine, and this one's real interesting. This one's been in the news a lot. The race has shifted a million times, and there's so much that has went into the state of Maine and how this race is going to conclude in the final 90-some days of this race. Susan Collins, up for re-election, ultimately won this race back in 2020, despite polling and everything saying that she was not going to win. 2026 is different, and the Democrats have a new candidate in the race who's not got the scandals of that of Graham Plattner, and ultimately he is going to perform well across the state, and I believe that he will finally flip the state of Maine, unseating Senator Susan Collins, and that is probably roughly about 1% to 2 percentage point margin. As at the time that I'm filming this in early August, I believe that Democrats are definitely favored to win the state of Maine. We're going to continue to pay attention to the race and see how things shift out in the coming days and coming weeks and, of course, coming months. But as of this moment, I believe the Democrats still ultimately have the upper hand in that race. So that brings us to the 3 final races, and these are all going to be decided by under a percentage point in my current prediction format. So with that said, let's start with the state of Ohio, a state that Republicans have performed well in the past several election cycles, ultimately unseating Sherrod Brown back in 2024. Sherrod Brown's back for revenge, shall I say. And ultimately, Sherrod Brown has an opportunity to flip this race in Ohio, but I'm going to be honest, it's still a very hard race to defeat a Republican in the state of Ohio, even being someone like Sherrod Brown, even in this Democratic environment. And for that reason, I still have Ohio in this tilt Republican margin. So under a percentage point, Democrats definitely have an opportunity here, but Republicans still favored in the state of Ohio. My personal opinion, according to metrics and everything about the race so far. So with that said, we're left with 2 final states, and these 2 states are ones that cause me a lot of controversy on this channel when I talk about them, because if I tell you that the Republicans are going to win, I have Democrats in my comment section saying that I'm wrong. And if I tell you that Democrats are going to win, I have Republicans. So it's vice versa. Whatever I tell you, I'm going to have the other side coming after me saying that I'm wrong. And ultimately, I understand that. These are 2 very tense races, very specific based races, and ones that Democrats do have an opportunity at. Whether you're a Republican or Democrat, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that these 2 races are a lot closer than they would have been, say, a few years ago. So ultimately, with that said, let's go ahead and start by talking about the state of Texas. And in my last prediction, I had the state of Texas going to the Democrats, and it's not changed. I believe that James Talarico, still a very strong candidate, winning by under a percentage point. But ultimately, Ken Paxton, this flawed type candidate in the state of Texas, and I just don't believe that he's going to be able to pull it off. I don't believe that the odds are in his favor, and I believe that James Talarico, according to recent Fox News polling and polling in general. He's got the upper hand in this race. And while I don't necessarily think that it's by the margin that Fox News may have you believe or any other pollster may have you believe, I do believe that James Talarico does have the upper hand. Now, we're going to see in the coming weeks and months on how this race is going to shift out over the next 90-some days, and how this race can ultimately play in to the effect for the Senate majority, because it does. It plays into this Senate majority very, very high. It's a very important race, and one that Democrats have to win if they want to win control of the Senate, in my mind. So at this point, Democrats sitting at 50 seats to Republicans 49, coming down to the final state of Alaska. This state also, last prediction, I had this going to the Democrats in that tilt margin, and that's not changed in this race either. I believe that Mary Peltola, the very best candidate they possibly could have got to run in this race in the state of Alaska, ultimately decided to run and has performed well since. The averages on VoteHub, and if you look at polling, has her ahead, and I don't believe that that is necessarily untrue. I think that Mary Peltola, a very strong candidate in a Democratic environment, is going to have an upper hand here and going to have an opportunity to unseat the Republican in the race in Alaska. So with that said, this is my final Senate prediction. I don't think I have any necessarily flips from my last one, but ultimately this is the final prediction for the month of August, at least the beginning of August, for the United States Senate. Democrats sitting at about 51 seats, Republicans sitting at 49. So with that said, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I have some videos posed on your right, and you can check those out if you would like as well. So don't forget to like the video, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys again so much for watching.